Round of applause.
Hello, hello. Thank you. As she said, we are from Virtuos, and we're going to be talking about these topics here, where we have game design is more than just ideas, myths about game design, and common mistakes in game design. And then we're going to take a kind of just a close look at zooming in on a certain aspect of level design. So who are we and what do we do? So we're part of Virtuous Games. We are rather one of the largest game development companies in the world with over 3,800 people. And we got 23 locations around the world. And this is just some of the key games that our company has collaborated on. We've obviously collaborated with a whole lot more than this, but these are some big highlights. These are a lot of the studios, the industry leaders, publishers, and developers that we have worked with, just to name a few. And what do we do? Well, if you can dream it, we can do it. So here at Virtuos KL, we're a full co-dev studio, and we have 85 environment artists, 10 engineering, 5 technical artists, and 10 design team members right now. And obviously that puts us a little over 100 people since 2022. This is just a few games that we've contributed to at our particular studio here in KL. So a little bit about us, the speakers. So I've been in the game industry for 26 years now and shipped multiple titles on multiple different systems, consoles, PC. And I've worked with many publishers and other developers. EA, NCSoft, Activision, just to name a few. My main role has been level design throughout history, and content design, world building was some of the other stuff that I touched in. How I got started in games was actually playing Doom all the way back in like 1994. Saw that you could make your own levels and moved a vertice inside the hallway of one of the maps. And then I just asked myself, how does somebody get a job doing this? That was the first thing that came to my mind. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Randy.
Hello, my name is Randy Vasquez. I'm the lead game designer over at KL right now. So, kind of about me. I've been in the industry for about 20 years. I've worked on a few titles as well. As you can see that Jason and me worked on Warhammer Online together back in like 2007. So we've been knowing each other for a little bit and put up with each other for a little bit. So it's all fun. I've mostly been working on systems, mechanics, content creation, quest, missions, encounters as well. I've worked with a lot of the major publishers as well, such as like EA, Vivendi. I've worked with, NCSoft. I've worked on a bunch of other things. So kind of what got me into gaming was kind of typical for a lot of designers, where we did a lot of board games when I was young. Modifying the board game rules, Dungeons and Dragons, fantasy type stuff. Basically everything that was game related, I was all into, right? So again, designers always start on board games. My number one go-to. So we're also going to be talking about game design is more than just ideas, right? So that's kind of the main topic today for this section at least. So with this section, what is game design? Game design is always a nebulous term. No one actually knows what the hell we actually do. So what do we actually do? Well, game designers, we are a blend of creativity and technical know-how. Well, in my case, not so much technical, but more creative, but I'll go with that. So what are the goals that game designers have, right? Well, we have an idea, or we have someone else's idea or someone else's vision. We make that real. We make that tangible, right? We also solve problems through our designs. We need to make sure that we're always constantly talking, aligning and communicating with all the teams around us. And we need to also make sure that we're constantly iterating on what we're doing, whether it's an idea, whether it's a prototype, whether it's a polished piece of content in a game. We should always be iterating. So, why the game designer is more than just ideas? Well, we don't have just ideas because ideas don't make themselves to paper. Ideas don't make themselves to players' hands, right? So, we do a lot of documentation. We do a lot of playtesting. We do a lot of implementation. We do a lot of just alignment and communication. I think communication is probably more than half of our job if we're doing it correctly, because every time we make a document and we're giving it to the artists, we're giving it to the engineers, we're giving it to anyone on the team, we need to make sure that that idea is actually communicated properly and we're articulating our ideas in ways that other people can grasp it. So, who do we collaborate? Well, we collaborate with everyone. And here I have artists, more aesthetics and mood, engineers, they're more heavy tech and implementation. We have other type of designers where it's all mechanics and rules. And then, of course, we have our support teams. Everyone always forgets our support teams, right? We have our QA, we have our IT, we have our HR, we have basically marketing, we have advertising, we have our data analytics, we have so many different types of teams, I'm not naming all of them, that we need to depend on in order to do our job. You know, I had some discussions about people with like data analysts that they're not necessarily developers, but to me, they're totally developed. They're part of the team. They help us to build data. They also help us to make decisions. So now, this is what the process kind of looks like for most games. Of course, I'm generalizing a very high level. So we go from concept stage, we have pre-production, we have production, we have launch, and we have live support. And within each of these phases, game design has a different responsibility on each individual one. So for game design, once we're in concept phase, that's where we're working with ideas. That's where we're working with what works with this, what doesn't work with this. Okay, does this actually, does this feel good for this game? And then you go to pre-production, we go to production. That's where we start breaking down the vision. That's where we start kind of making sure like, okay, does this vision pieces actually work? And can we convert these prototypes into actual gameplay? Make sure that we're testing things, right? Again, fun, name of the game. So when we hit launch, then we're going to be like, okay, this is the polished version. Now a lot of people go to early access, right? And they're doing playtests during early access and everything, getting everything situated. So that's kind of like 3A right there between. And then, of course, when we go to live, that's when we actually kind of still are planning for the next release. We're still doing DLC stuff. We're still kind of getting the ball rolling with bug fixing and everything else. So do you want to touch upon level design?
Yeah. So on concept, we usually like to have a level brief first, and that's just a very high level understanding of what the expectation of the level is going to be in terms of its theme and kind of what kind of gameplay we might want to be experiencing inside of there. And then we're also creating our metrics, and our metrics are not just about the gameplay itself, which is also very important, and we want to contribute to pacing and so on. But we're also creating metrics for things known as modular design. I don't know how many of you know about modular design, but it's a way that you quickly iterate making blockouts of maps. Going through the rest of them? Okay. So on pre-production level design, we do our documentation, and that's where we're filling in all those important details of that level. We cover everything. We have, where the NPCs go, how many pickups there are, what's inside those pickups, what is the pathing, what is the golden path of the player. So all this information needs to be in there, all those beats, everything. Then we also, of course, want to do our research and reference and find things to get more detailed information about what this space is going to look like and what that player can experience from a visual standpoint, and how we can get this information across to the level artists so that they can understand at least what we were kind of envisioning. And that might change a little bit based on the art direction, but that's part of that process. So for production, that's when we get to the fun part. That's where we start blocking out this vision that we have. This is where we start putting in the gameplay and making sure that the player can play from point A to point B without falling through the world, that we have all the information there, development text so that artists know what we're trying to achieve with some kind of visuals in there, game, what is it, game designer lighting, which is just basic lighting to call out certain things. Uh, yeah, and then we also put in the actual implementation of the gameplay. So we would have our, our first draft of enemy AI in there, and doors opening and closing and elevators moving, etc. So at launch, this is where the game should be polished. So we need to make sure we're polishing it up, making it solid, and making it that experience that we're looking for. And of course, bug fixing. And then on the live support, we're actually planning for another release if there's going to be one. So we'll go through this whole process again as well. But again, we continue with bug fixing and any more polish that may need to be there.
So when we look at game design and design in general, right, we take a vision and craft it into a set of rules and mechanics that players can enjoy. So to me, rules and mechanics are important, but also the last bit of the sentence where players can enjoy. People play games because they're fun. That's what we need to do, right? So let's talk about some myths about game design. So myth number 1, designers just play games all day. That's what all of our parents have been telling us for years. And look where we are now, still playing games, right? Hopefully. So designers just don't play games all day. When we do play a game, we need to analyze it. We need to basically take notes on it. We need to make sure that when we look at a game, we look at the progression. We look at the characters. We look at the controls. We look at the camera. We look at the standards. We look, is this game doing something new? Is this game doing something old? Is it bringing something old in a new, fresh way? Again, every time you play a game, make sure you're looking at what this game is doing. Look at the emotions that you're feeling as you're playing through the game. Emotions and emotional targets have kind of become a very important thing in the past decade or so, where before it wasn't something that we discussed that much in game design. But again, game design as a medium, it keeps growing. So we need to keep playing games in order to, the indie game developers are doing an amazing job of kind of pushing some of the boundaries of what is a game, how the game mechanics interact with each other. It's really awesome at what they're doing. We need to play more of those. So myth number 2, designers make the whole game. That is not accurate. We all know that. We need engineers, we need artists, we need everyone to help us make a game together, right? That's the important part. So because we need everyone, yes, designers, we aren't necessarily making the assets. We're not building the tech, but we're using the tech. We're using those assets together to make a game. So that's something that we need to think of as a kind of distinction. Myth number 3, designers only generate ideas. So anyone that tells you they're a designer and they only generate ideas, are they really a designer? Ideas are worth nothing. And I will say that again, ideas are worth nothing. Ideas are worth something when we put it to paper. Ideas are worth something when we start implementing, we start testing it, and we start getting other people to see our vision. We need to make our vision tangible in order to make the design worthwhile, at least in my mind. So now, mistakes to avoid as a game designer. This is something that we're going to talk about, a few case studies that we have for both level design and game design. So mistake number 1, investing in art too soon.
There we go. Sorry. So investing in art too soon, and this is just kind of a case study. Back in the day when I was just making maps for fun, doing it as a hobby at home, I was actually working inside of Quake 2, making some stuff. And the mistake that I would make is that I actually went room by room and detailed it as much as possible. These older games, I don't know if any of you have played these or even modified them, but it is an older game, showing my age here. And level design actually did a lot of the detail inside of those maps. They didn't have dedicated artists for this stuff. So I would sit there and go through and detail room by room by room by room. And the problem that this caused was that the map didn't have a nice good flow to it, a nice good pacing. I was just more worried about the art. I didn't do a block out first and decide that this map was fun before I made it pretty. So I actually just wasted a whole bunch of time.
All right, so number 2, not investing in tools. Tools are so important for what we do. The software that we're using, the way that we want to work, the pipelines, the workflow. Once you start getting into the development process, we need tools in order to make our workflow faster and better and more iterative. And iteration takes time. So kind of the case example I'm using is I worked on God of War 2018, and I tell people this story all the time. We didn't have a tool set. We did everything in Lua. We had a Lua compiler and we had Maya. That's how we implemented all of our encounters. So me being an encounter designer, I basically had a little piece of geometry that I put down, and I was like, okay, I know in my brain that this is the creature that I'm putting down, and then I'm scripting it directly in Lua, and then I compile it directly to the dev kit, and I test it directly. There was really no editor, So because of that, sometimes a simple encounter would take about a few hours to do, and especially I'm not the strongest scripter or coder. So it took me a little bit longer than other people that were heavy, hardcore scripters. Then you look at WildStar, which is an MMO that I worked on as a path designer. And on that one, everything was a tool set. I can create an encounter in less than 5 minutes. Now, if that encounter is good or not, that's a whole other thing. But again, through iteration and playtest, I made them better, I swear. So we have 2 examples here, right? God of War 2018 is an amazing game. It looks beautiful. It played really good. But everyone on the team, we had to do everything through just pure scripting, through pure Lua, right? In Ragnarok, I know that the team switched over from Lua over to their own scripting system that they developed. So I know that they started building tools so they can do the work faster, but that's a lesson learned from that project, right? And then WildStar, the tools, we had a full dedicated tools team to help us make our workflow so much quicker, so much faster. And we basically had a really custom engine that we could make the content that we wanted to, and our turnaround for that was super quick. So it's actually really, really important for you all to invest in tools and making sure that you're not doing as much stuff hand by hand, because again, you start making mistakes. If you can start validating the mistakes or start validating the errors, you'd be surprised how much less time you spend developing kind of like tooling things, because the development process is just so more efficient and streamlined.
So yeah, not planning. It's obviously important to plan your game. At least I hope you all know that. If you don't, you should know now. It's very, very important to plan. Example, working at a previous company, I was working on Monsters, Inc. for PlayStation 2. The company doesn't exist anymore, so I don't really have a problem saying something about this. But we planned out our levels and our game design at the same time, which made no sense. We got out a big, giant piece of paper, and we'd start planning a level, and then we'd actually come up with game features that way. And we did this through the entirety of the project. So there was zero cohesiveness between these game mechanics and these features. So it would be wise that before you even start planning a level, you plan out what those game features are.
Mildly important.
Mildly.
Just mildly. So another one, right, is that we're professionals. We're not buying our own game. We need to make our game so that other people enjoy it. We're entertainers. So, who are the players? What do they do? What do they like? What do they expect? These are questions that we constantly need to ask ourselves. Every feature, every mechanic, every gameplay element that we're thinking about for this game, it needs to be cohesive with the rest of the plan, as we talked about the last slide. So this is something that designers, we need to think about. We need to plan a lot of stuff out, and this is where we also collaborate with other people, is building the plan, making sure that we're executing the plan also. And last but not least, not playtesting enough. So I know talking to some developers, you really start, and I know this is gonna sound bad, but like after you work on a game for like a year or two and stuff like that, you start hating that game almost, right? You want it to just be over. It's like that fatigue sets in. But when this sets in, this is the most important thing to keep playtesting your game. You can tell the difference between a team that has played their game and knows their game in and out compared to a team that does not know their game. So we need to love our game. We can hate it as well, but we need to love our game in that we need to make sure we keep playing it, we understand it, we know it. We need to know it better than the current players. And the department that knows our game the best is usually QA. So every time you have a playtest, do not play against QA. They will destroy you. And any developer knows better to like challenge QA in anything. So we're gonna move on to the next section.
Yep. So talking about level design, there's a lot of aspects of level design. Actually, I just want to cover a small aspect of level design, because if I were to talk about all of level design, it'd probably take a couple of weeks. I don't think we all have that time, right? So a video game, it's made with levels, right? And without that level, nobody can play it. So level design is where we take all of those elements from game development. We take design, we take art, we take tech, and we put it all together into a cohesive experience for that player to have some fun. And a large portion of the game design features, thanks to Randy, those get made for the game levels. And interactive experience, it's a playground, it's a story where all the game elements, we put them all together for that fun experience. We have, all these tools that we can play with: environments, pathing, events, gameplay elements, quests, combat, cinematics. All these things are important aspects to it. So, using these gameplay elements, what we really want to do is create a rhythmic pattern and a way to play with these players' emotions and their feelings so that they can have an interesting experience. So if we look at an intensity graph like this is from another game. I don't know which one, but it's from another game. And if you look at this and you compared this to a movie, you'd actually have very similar, very similar curve graph going on. We want to bring those emotions up and down, up and down, up and down.
If I can jump in real quick, if you don't mind.
You can.
So on actually God of War, how we did our playtesting, we had similar graphs to this. Whenever we had playtest, we had kind of the players kind of mark when the excitement was, when the excitement wasn't. And then we also had to do this on our own side. So we actually had marked of like, hey, this is going to be like the peak of excitement. This is going to be a low point. So we always had a roller coaster. And then that was our intention for the design. And if our design matched what the players were saying, we did good, we got high scores. So every level kind of had scores. And working with the level designers, we were basically kind of making sure that our intention and the graph of what the players were playing and what they were giving us feedback on were matching. So again, setting those expectations and using these graphs are super important for us to kind of plan out the fun, right? Plan out the adventure that we want players to go through.
So what kind of tools do we have that we get to play with their emotions and desires? As we can see, we've got a few. We've got more than this. This is just a little list. We can have explorable areas and combat moments. Puzzles is a really good one. Rewarding the player. These are all elements that we can use. So if a game level looked like this in a flow, you go in and you have combat, and then you get a puzzle and another puzzle, and then you get a safe area, and then exploration, and then a safe area, and then 2 rewards. It feels a little jarring, right? It's very sharp and up and down. It doesn't make any sense. Here is a much better example. You start with a safe area, you get to explore and give that player some time to breathe, and then they get introduced to combat, and then they get rewarded with a cinematic. And then they do a little more exploration, get the vibe of the world out there. Then they get revealed a beautiful vista. It's another reward for them, right? And then they get a nice little puzzle, and then combat. And then a reward for that combat. But this seems like a much smoother experience where you're kind of going up and down, because the previous one was like, hello, 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 hello. So these are some of the things that would make a level much better in these scenarios as well, giving them a clear path and having good pacing, smooth progression. We don't want it overly linear. We want to give that player some fulfillment and some excitement and unexpected surprises. That's basically a wrap for that. Those are the things that we're looking for when we want to play with the players' emotions and get them involved into the level. We make games better together.
We do.
Any time for Q&A?
Yes, there's. So, thank you so much. So we have Q&A. Can we open it up for 2 people or 3 people? Okay, first. Can I have one of the mic, please, if you don't mind? Okay. All right.
Hi. So first of all, thank you for giving this workshop. I have just a few questions. I hope they're not too much. So the first question is with level design. When I first started doing level design, I made the common mistake a lot of people make, which is doing environment art and not level design. When I fixed that mistake, I also, to give my vision to someone, I felt like I still need to do some sort of environment. But at what point do I start doing that? And it would be a good point to start, just do a bit of environment after I'm done gray boxing.
Yeah, so what you're asking is, how far do you take your blockouts? Yeah, I mean, it depends on your ability. If it were me personally, I think taking it as far as you can within the given amount of time that you have is probably the best solution, because at least you're conveying as much information as you can to that environment artist. You just can't get hurt or upset if the environment artist has a different vision, right?
And is using sometimes it's hard to do everything on a game engine because you don't have the animations, etc. So is using something like an existing level editor for a game like Half-Life acceptable for portfolio pieces or showcases?
Yeah, I would think so, especially if it's just for portfolio pieces. It's also beneficial, I think, Half-Life Editor, you can actually export those worlds anyways, right? So you can find different ways to get it to the client. That might be the one thing that you may run into, is maybe they want to see your work, and then you have to find a way to package that up and get it to them. But when it's just coming to the portfolio and showing off, yeah, show off what you got as long as you're proud of it.
When it comes to delivering what I've done, is there any standard or like a common standard for game design documents that I have to uphold or follow, or do I just kind of try to format it in a proper way?
Do you mean for level design documents or game design?
Maybe generally a game design document, but it will include a section of levels where I will go through the levels I've designed as well.
Okay. I don't think there's a standard, as long as it's legible and kind of in sort of a logical manner, and you're just giving enough information that somebody can understand what is happening in this game and what is happening in this level.
I want to tack onto that a little bit. So for all people that want to do something with like game design, right? For documentation wise, if you can answer the W's and the H, right? The who, what, when, where, why, and how. Those are the things you need to answer. And if your document can answer those questions, then people can understand it, right? It's all about just making sure that you're able to articulate your idea and your vision and that they understand it. Because some of the test for game designers especially is that we need to create a document and then we need to hand it off to someone to understand, right? We cannot talk to them because they're reading our document. So they need to understand our vision based on what that document is. How do we do that? We use a mix of images, we use a mix of words, charts, a lot of flow charts, a lot of like sometimes spreadsheets, use every tool available to you to get your idea across. That's gonna be the best advice I can give you.
Thank you.
We do talk to them, but the thing is, the document needs to stand on its own.
All right, so I'm gonna open up for another one. All right, so we have one over there. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm gonna cut it until that is the last one. But if you have question, so you can visit their booth at booth 14 and 15. You can ask plenty. Take your time. All right.
Hello. Okay, I have two questions. The first one is, what do you think is a must-have in a GDD when I'm trying to showcase it to game companies to like try to interview for a game designer position?
What type of game design? There's so many different types.
Let's say I'm trying to create a GDD for a 2D game, RPG, something like that.
Okay.
What are the must-haves in those kind of documents?
So the W's and the H's that I mentioned earlier, you need to have that, right? So that's a very broad topic. That's why I asked what type of design. So if it's a progression and economy designer position, then I expect the person to talk about progression and economy of the game, talk about the flow, talk about the curves, and do a little bit of math, right? If it's a person that's more narrative, so narrative design, quest design.
Yeah, specifically for game mechanics.
Okay, so like gameplay, then I want you to describe gameplay. I want you to be able to showcase, even if it's stick figures, showcase this is how the character will move, this is how the character will use this, even doing a little bit of like mock-up for some of the UI screen and like this is how the players will interact with it. Again, we have to think about the perspective of the player. We have to think about the perspective of the developer that's implementing this feature. And we have to be, that's why I'm saying is the document needs to stand on its own, especially when you're doing a test or especially when you're doing a portfolio piece. You need to make sure that that document says everything you need to say in a way that a person can read it and it's understandable. So organizing it, making sure the formatting is there, making sure it's searchable, because the way an artist will look at the document is completely different than the way an engineer would look at the document. Completely different to what a designer would look at the document, and completely different that a QA person would look at the document. So it's a lot of work to make these documents be something that everyone can understand. That's why some of these documents take months and months of like just hard work of iterating and making sure that while we're implementing this feature, we're still updating the documents. So to go back to the original question though, is you need to articulate your vision and you need to do that through words, images, and flowcharts. Again, images are for the artist, words are for the designers, and flowcharts are for the engineers, right? I'm generalizing, of course, but these are kind of the three things that you can like, okay, the person understands the flow of this system, they understand the flow of this mechanic, the player journey, using user stories and developer stories, right? So as a player, blah, 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 because of blah, 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 right? So without specific examples, it gets kind of tough to dive into the detail of what is actually needed for the designs themselves. And the same thing for the developer. As a developer, I need a system or I need a tool in which I could calculate the way that this character jumps or the way this character mantles over this other object. So I hope that helps.
Okay. And the last question is, can we have the slideshow?
I have to talk to my boss.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.